Her mother used to say that sometimes the world doesn't let you see the truth until you've run straight into a wall of it. On a damp Tuesday evening, one officer's grim announcement would form exactly that wall for a community unprepared for the scandal about to shatter its assumptions about love, loyalty, and the quiet facade of suburban decency. Word spread quickly, as it often does when the news is bizarre and drenched in betrayal. The rumors started with the earliest responders. Two paramedics speaking in hushed voices behind the ambulance's open doors. And soon the neighbors pressed up against the yellow tape, each jostling for their own glimpse. Everyone whispered a variation of the same question. How could a 23-year-old newlywed vanish and allegedly wind up inside the home of a 71-year-old retiree? And worse, how could it all connect to an obituary that stated she was dead and buried 3 weeks ago? The heartbreak, so heavily laced with disbelief, would lead to revelations that were both tragic and complicated beyond initial comprehension. Court documents revealed that Celia's funeral was held last month. An online anchor's voice boomed from a phone in the crowd, playing a local station's coverage of the shocking development. Her name was Celia Haverton, and people recalled her as sweet, maybe a little anxious, always picking at the chipped polish on her nails. Her husband, a man named Tyler Haverton, was a maintenance worker at an office building downtown. Ordinary in all respects, except for the fact that he was now trembling behind the police barricade, refusing to accept the stories swirling around him. He'd called 911 2 nights ago after receiving a cryptic text from Celia's phone, a message so short and disturbing it left him shaking. "Don't look for me, I'm gone." This was made all the more confusing by the fact that her funeral service had concluded 3 weeks prior. On that day, he had wept by a polished casket, assured by the coroner that a tragic accident, her body found near a ravine, had claimed her life. He had believed it. Maybe deep down he'd needed to believe it. Yet now, here she was, if the murmurings around him were to be trusted, very much alive in the old neighbor's house. The neighbor in question was Neville Hines, a 71-year-old retired postal clerk with arthritic hands and a reputation for wave and smile gentility. It didn't make sense to anyone that Neville could possibly be entangled with Celia. A detective approached Tyler with cautious sympathy. The policeman explained that they'd followed a missing person tip from an acquaintance who insisted Celia was not only alive but living in secret. That tip had proven correct. During a welfare check, they discovered Celia hiding in an upstairs room at Neville's place. But the bigger shock was her refusal to acknowledge that she had a husband who'd been grieving her. She was calm, allegedly stating that she didn't want to see Tyler. Witnesses whispered that she looked pale, as though she herself was unsure how she'd ended up in this twisted situation. Some claimed they saw her mouth trembling, with something like relief when the officers came in, as though she'd expected everything to fall apart eventually. Others swore they heard her telling Neville to call a lawyer. The hush fell over the block as officers guided her into the police cruiser. She never looked up, never made eye contact with Tyler. Her lips remained thin, pressed together in self-imposed silence, while Neville stood on his porch in a rumpled bathrobe, arms crossed over his chest, old eyes full of a surprising fire. Tyler, tears streaking his cheeks, couldn't speak. He reached out as if to touch her, but the officers blocked his path, and soon the vehicles pulled away. In that moment, every lurid speculation latched onto the watchers. A wave of hushed condemnation rippled through the crowd. She used him. She's a gold digger. He tricked her. He's got some weird hold on her. Maybe they're both insane. That was the talk, but no one truly knew the circumstances. Not yet. Not how Celia had gotten so close to Neville, nor what had propelled her to sever ties with reality by faking her death. Tyler hunched on the curb, stared off into space as the cruisers vanished from view. His eyes glazed over with betrayal, but he also exuded a desperate need for answers. Behind him, the ambulance closed its doors, and a paramedic scrolled through her phone in disbelief. News vans arrived minutes later, capturing raw footage of a neighborhood's confusion that would soon go viral. A series of interviews began to surface that same night. A local reporter cornered a neighbor named Brenda, who had once shared a fence line with Celia and Tyler. She was shy but polite. "I never saw anything weird," Brenda said. her voice a mix of pity and indignation. I thought Celia was too quiet sometimes, but she'd wave if she caught my eye, and that she was such a young bride. We all went to the barbecue after they got married, a casual thing in Tyler's mom's backyard. Celia looked, well, I guess uneasy. She always looked uneasy, but I never suspected she was capable of. She stopped mid-sentence, as though the words themselves sounded too scandalous to say out loud. Could you have guessed she had ties to your neighbor, Mr. Hines? The reporter pressed. Brenda balked, eyes widening with a flash of confusion. Hines, that old man? He's so quiet. He putters around in his yard, feeds stray cats. That's it. Everyone knows he's, well, ancient. He's what, 70-something? I can't even imagine a conversation between those two, so no, I wouldn't have guessed. She let out a half-disgusted laugh. They say she was living there? I can't even wrap my head around it. An entire documentary's worth of speculation would soon flood the local news. Over the following day, rumors started suggesting Celia had never loved Tyler at all, that she might have married him for the security of having a stable man while she was carrying on with someone else behind his back. Others said maybe Neville had groomed her in some insidious way, forging an emotional dependency. Another neighbor told a reporter, I've seen the way he looks out his window, leering. I can't believe I never said anything. At that, a flurry of judgments about power dynamics and questionable ethics seized the story, generating a swirl of anger. By the time the evening news ran, the story had grown from a local scandal to a regional sensation. Voicemail 2:32 a.m. An anchor's voice chimed on the broadcast as they replayed a snippet left on the station's tip line by an anonymous caller who'd claimed Celia was alive. The voice was shaky, unclear if it belonged to a man or a woman. She's in that house, I swear to God, it said. I saw her at the upstairs window. She's not dead. They faked it. I don't know why. The station's lead reporter paused in her newscast. We passed this information on to law enforcement, who confirmed that a missing person inquiry was reopened as a result. The question remains, what truly happened to Celia Haverton, and why was her husband made to believe she was gone for good? Tyler, sinking into a grief-laden confusion, granted a brief phone interview to a local daily. His voice trembled. I loved her. I still do. I don't know what's going on. He paused, then repeated, I don't know what's going on. But the facts were piling up whether he understood them or not. There was a funeral, there were official documents marking her as deceased, and there were tears shed by Tyler and her friends. At the same time, there was the elderly neighbor with a guarded look in his eye, who had apparently been harboring Celia with her full cooperation. The entire scenario felt plucked from a cheap tabloid, except there was nothing cheap about the rawness in Tyler's voice. In the background, the reporter could hear him rummaging through papers, speaking in half-complete sentences about how he recognized her remains by the ring on her finger. That ring had apparently been found at the site of her supposed demise. I didn't ask to see more, Tyler admitted, voice cracking. I let them close the casket because I was too afraid to see her like that. I guess a part of me, was it relief? I don't know. I can't believe I'm even saying that out loud. The scandal expanded as the police station released a statement that they were investigating possible fraud, identity tampering, or conspiracy to commit some manner of staged death. Celia was being questioned. Neville was also being questioned. In the wake of that official news, a swirl of interview requests assaulted the detective in charge. So far, they had pieces of a timeline but no cohesive narrative. The detective, a lean man named Castro, recounted in a press briefing, "We are examining all medical records, coroner statements, and any official who signed off on the death certificate. There's potential wrongdoing on multiple fronts." A barrage of cameras flashed in his face, but he remained calm, adding, "We ask the public for patience. This is an active, complex investigation." Then he ducked away, leaving the city hungry for more. For a brief moment, the camera panned across the sidewalk outside the station, capturing Tyler leaning against the wall, wiping tears, while a swirl of reporters tried to corner him. The whole spectacle began to resemble a bizarre reality show nobody wanted, but everyone couldn't stop watching. Meanwhile, in the quiet corners of the city, folks rewatched clips and tried to glean meaning from them. Celia's slender frame being helped into the police car, wearing a baggy shirt that likely belonged to Neville, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide as she glanced sideways at the cameras. The careful observer might have noticed how Neville limped slightly as he tried to follow the police car, calling out, "She's fragile! Be careful with her!" That single line, picked up by a mic, circulated in the media like a cryptic clue. In that one plea, some saw a devoted caretaker, others saw a manipulative old man playing the protector. Everyone's biases painted Neville as either a predator or a savior, and there was no shortage of speculation. Back at Tyler's modest apartment, the couch still wore the imprint of Celia's shape. His mother mentioned that quietly to a friend during a phone call. She said, I don't know how he's going to survive this. She was everything to him. Well, everything and also not enough, apparently. Her tone carried the heartbreak of a mother who'd grown suspicious of her daughter-in-law, but never wanted to believe the worst. She asked Tyler if he'd heard from Celia directly, to which he only shook his head, eyes hollowed. I keep checking her social media. Nothing. She blocked me from everything. It all felt too immediate and too incomprehensible. The sense of betrayal was so deep that Tyler spent hours at night just staring at the last photo he had of them together, snapped at a friend's wedding 2 months prior. In it, Celia was smiling softly, wearing a pale green dress, her arms around him. He tortured himself, replaying the image in his mind, trying to see if she looked uncomfortable or if her eyes hinted at another life. One day, that torment would become public knowledge, spliced into a documentary or an online news feature. But for now, it was his private burden, pressing in on him each evening. When the first official transcript leaked, an excerpt from Celia's initial questioning, the city was riveted. "Ma'am, do you recognize this photograph?" the detective asked. "Yes," Celia answered quietly. "That's me," the detective pressed. "And you're aware there was a funeral for you 3 weeks ago." Silence. Then Celia's voice, "Yes." Another question. "Why would you let your husband believe you were dead?" A full 6-second gap followed. Then Celia softly stated, "He wasn't good for me. I had to get away, and that was the only way." The hush that spread through the station at that statement was, by all accounts, chilling. She did not elaborate in that particular transcript, not yet. But those words alone cast Tyler in a suspicious light. Social media exploded with speculation. Had Tyler been abusive, controlling, or was Celia spinning a dramatic excuse? Meanwhile, a different transcript captured Neville's side of the story. "I couldn't just leave her," Neville insisted to the detective. "She was desperate, terrified. She begged me. Do you understand? She begged me to help her. She said she needed a safe place, that no one would ever look for her in my house because it was, it's run down. It's just an old guy living there." He sounded distressed. The detective asked, "And how long had you two been seeing each other intimately?" Neville's answer came as a strangled whisper. It started maybe 6 months ago. It wasn't planned. She came over one day. We were talking. We had coffee. She cried about her troubles. One thing led to another." Pressed on the question of what those troubles were, Neville mumbled something inaudible in the transcript. Then he added, "All I know is she said she had no choice." This partial leak unleashed an even more frenzied debate. The tabloids fixated on the idea of a youthful bride possibly entangled in an abusive marriage. But then local bloggers dug up Tyler's background. No evidence of violence, no past arrests. He appeared mild-mannered, if a bit insecure. People in his life insisted he was a pushover, not someone who terrorized Celia. Some argued that emotional abuse could hide behind closed doors. Others said Celia was manipulative. The short statement, "I had no choice," became the anchor for endless talk show dialogues about what might have driven a woman so young to find solace in an old man. The entire city found itself consumed by a question with no easy answers. Days passed, and Celia remained in police custody, pending further investigation. Tyler wasn't sure if he wanted to press charges. He still vacillated between heartbreak and a confused love, uncertain if she was a victim or a villain. In glimpses at the station hallway as he walked by with his attorney, he saw her sitting in a small interrogation room, a blanket draped over her shoulders, hair messy, face pale, eyes on the floor. She refused to look at him. He overheard her talking to a detective. "I'm not some monster. There are things you don't understand." That line echoed in his head all night. As each day wore on, more confessional tidbits emerged. The detective let slip a piece of Celia's confession to the press. I needed an out. Neville offered me that. I didn't fake my death to hurt anyone. I did it because I was scared. The cryptic statement ignited a new wave of speculation. Online threads dissected every possible angle. Some insisted Celia must be lying to hide a scandalous affair and that she used the most extreme escape route possible, staging her own death. Others believed she might genuinely have felt endangered, but from what? Tyler? The pressure of an unhappy marriage? A hidden addiction? The coverage churned on, talk shows analyzing the age difference between her and Neville, painting lurid pictures of him seducing her with paternal care or her manipulating him to gain access to his pension or finances. The city had no shortage of salacious theories. Behind the scenes, Detective Castro and his team combed through phone records, text messages, and the coroner's paperwork to see who had orchestrated the fake death. The coroner was outraged, swearing they'd never identified Celia by name, claiming they'd had an unclaimed female body with partial matching attributes discovered in that ravine and a ring in the personal effects that matched the description Tyler provided. Tyler identified the ring, and that was apparently the deciding factor. We asked if the family wanted to do a thorough identification, the coroner's statement read, but the husband insisted we keep the casket closed. He was grieving. We followed the standard protocol. That heartbreak was further complicated by the fact that Celia's own mother had passed away years before, and her father was estranged, so Tyler's word was the only close family reference. The funeral was planned in haste with no official autopsy to confirm identity. Detective Castro found it all sloppy but not necessarily illegal. It merely added to the swirling confusion. In the swirling rumor mill, a single question stood out. How long had Celia planned it? And why Naval, of all people? The next wave of revelations focused on the possibility that Neville had a hidden stash of money or that he was lonely and emotionally vulnerable. Some neighbors insisted they'd seen Celia's car parked by Neville's house late at night months before she disappeared. I never said anything because I thought maybe she was being neighborly, helping out an old man, one witness said. Never realized it was an affair. People began digging for details of their interactions, a chat over the chain-link fence, groceries carried into his house, lights on at odd hours. The neighborhood turned inward, each neighbor reevaluating small events that had once seemed innocuous. Local press took to the streets with cameras, capturing sound bites from random bystanders. "It's the ultimate betrayal," said one, a mother pushing a stroller. "Poor husband," said another. But a smaller contingent championed the notion that Celia might have had hidden trauma. "We can't judge until we hear her story," a young woman said. "Maybe something was driving her to do this." Meanwhile, online trolls turned savage, calling her vile names, mocking Neville's advanced age. Conspiracy theories popped up about insurance fraud, though the modest policy in Tyler's name hardly seemed worth the risk. One moment that stirred the pot further was a snippet of a phone call recorded inside the station, where Celia was apparently allowed a conversation with Neville's lawyer. She was heard saying, "I didn't mean for any of this to get so big. I thought it could be quiet. Why is everyone so obsessed?" Then a pause. "I wasn't living a lie. I was trying to survive." That phrase, "I was trying to survive," set off another avalanche of speculation. Survive what? People demanded. With each new revelation, new questions swarmed, leaving the city on the edge of collective frustration. Everyone wanted the definitive story of how a young wife ended up in an old man's bed while letting the world believe she was 6 feet under. Things took a more shocking turn when the detective's timeline placed Celia at Neville's house mere hours after the alleged accident near the ravine. The official narrative was that a woman's body was found and Tyler confirmed the ring was Celia's, though the remains went to the local morgue as a presumed identity. In that same window, Celia was captured on a security camera near Neville's property, wearing a coat with a hood up. The footage was grainy, but the detective recognized her posture, her gait, the tilt of her head. She was alive and well, while an unidentified Jane Doe lay in the morgue. The detective stared at that footage for hours, the timestamp mocking the official story of Celia's tragic demise. This singular piece of video evidence would become a smoking gun, proving that the funeral was a sham. But the question remained, did Celia orchestrate everything, or was Tyler, in his desperation, complicit in ignoring the evidence of the body's true identity? Or was it simply a tragic coincidence that he never second-guessed the ring? Friends who once admired Celia for her quiet kindness found themselves reevaluating every memory. More than one recalled hearing her lament the relationship with Tyler, describing him as stifling, though never violent or overtly cruel. "I don't know," said a friend from high school. "She complained about feeling trapped, but I never thought that meant she'd do something so extreme." Another friend mentioned Celia's father, a man rumored to be controlling in Celia's childhood, leading her to run away from home at 17. Maybe she was conditioned to fear emotional captivity. In a swirling, documentary-like montage of speculation, these scraps became puzzle pieces. Shortly thereafter, the media obtained another chunk of Celia's interrogation tape. Her voice was subdued but clear. "Tyler never hit me. He never screamed. But he smothered me. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know who I was anymore. And he'd always talk about having kids soon, about building a bigger life. I I felt my whole world closing in." A detective pressed for clarity, and Celia explained how she'd encountered Neville that summer while trimming hedges between their houses. She was crying that day, upset after an argument with Tyler about money. "I barely had friends, so I guess I just latched on to Neville," Celia said. "He listened, offered me tea. He was gentle and understanding. I thought for once someone saw me, not just the role they wanted me to play." When asked why she escalated from a secret affair to staging her death, Celia's voice broke on the recording. "I felt like I was suffocating," she repeated. "I was scared to just run away because Tyler would keep looking. He'd beg me to come back. I wanted a clean slate. I confided in Neville and he told me we could find a way. I didn't think it would be an actual funeral. I never thought he'd let it go that far, but then once it started, I didn't know how to stop. I thought maybe I was already in too deep." The detective's voice was sympathetic but firm. "You realize the magnitude of what you've done, correct? A family, a community, a false death certificate, the whole city turning itself inside out?" Celia's reply was quiet. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't see a way out." This partial confession only deepened the city's divide. Some took it as proof Celia was a manipulative coward, unable to handle a normal marital commitment, so she fed lies to an old man. Others read it as the action of a terrified girl who found a single lifeline in someone as unexpected as Neville. It also cast Neville in a new light, though whether that was paternal or predatory was still hotly debated. Neville's attorney insisted that Neville was a caretaker, that Celia had confided suicidal ideations. He saw her as a vulnerable person. He just wanted to help. The romance came later. But the cynics saw an older man shaping a narrative to mask the exploitative nature of the relationship. On day 4 of Celia's detention, Tyler finally confronted her in an official setting with detectives overseeing. Transcript pages circulated widely, turning into the next big piece of the puzzle. The confrontation began with Tyler speaking in a trembling voice. "Celia, why? Just why?" She responded softly, "I'm sorry." He pressed, "You're sorry? That's all you have to say? You let me bury a casket. You let me stand at a grave thinking you died. You broke me." She sounded brittle. "I broke myself too. Don't act like I'm just fine." Tyler's voice cracked. "You could have just left me, served me divorce papers, anything but this. Why fake your death?" After a moment, she said, "You would have never let me go." He shot back, "I'm not a monster. I loved you." Celia sniffled. "You loved the idea of me. I was drowning." The detective tried to calm them. Tyler continued, "Was it about money? Did Neville promise you something?" She answered, "No, it was never about money. He just saw me. He took care of me. I felt safer with him than with you." The shockwave of that final admission flickered across Tyler's face. He whispered, "He's old enough to be your grandfather." Celia said nothing, looking down at her hands. In the hallway, reporters craned their necks to catch any scraps of conversation. This was the confrontation the city had been waiting for, the moment the husband and the resurrected wife would speak face to face. The transcripts circulated like wildfire, overshadowing everything else in local news. Talk radio host dissected the heartbreak in Tyler's words, the guilt in Celia's tone, the twisted implications for Neville. The moral complexity of the situation became the story's hallmark, each side painting Celia as either a fragile victim or a cunning manipulator, Neville as a kindly Samaritan or a manipulative opportunist, and Tyler as a clueless doormat or a controlling husband. Outside the station, Tyler stood in front of cameras later that day, looking shell-shocked. He whispered, "People keep saying I was controlling. I never wanted to control her. Maybe I loved her too much. Is that controlling?" He shook his head. "I would have let her leave if that's what she truly wanted. I thought she did want me. I guess I was wrong." Tears slipped down his face and he looked away from the cameras, refusing further questions. That night, another swirl of rumor erupted when it was revealed that Celia's paternal relatives had quietly reached out to the detectives. She hadn't spoken to them in years, but apparently the father was urging the police to consider Celia's mental health background. A reporter claimed that documents referenced a teenage hospitalization for anxiety and depression following a dramatic falling out at home. It cast a new lens on her actions, though whether it excused them was a debate no one could agree upon. Some said that a 23-year-old woman with a history of mental struggles might have genuinely believed drastic measures were her only solution. Others insisted this was a ploy, a sob story to avoid consequences for what was essentially an elaborate fraud. In a sensational snippet from Neville's second interrogation, he said, "I'll protect her with every last breath I have. I'd do it again if I had to." The detective's voice cut in. "You understand you're being investigated for possible conspiracy and fraud, correct?" Neville replied, "I do, but I'm telling you, I was just trying to save her life." That paternal devotion radiating from a 71-year-old man who had taken a wife in her early 20s as a lover only fueled the tabloids further. Late-night talk show hosts turned it into comedic monologues, employing dark irony that outraged some viewers. But the unstoppable machine of media coverage churned on, hungry for more. Celia herself withdrew from the spotlight, no more interviews, no more statements. She spent her days in a holding cell, meeting occasionally with lawyers, refusing to see Tyler or sign any forms. She was a ghost in that station, ironically embodying the intangible presence she had tried to become with her staged death. The only person she allowed any meaningful contact with, ironically, was Neville. They had supervised visits, during which they reportedly held hands. The police staff, who witnessed these interactions, described it as strangely touching in an unsettling way, as if seeing a child clinging to a gentle grandparent, except it was also clearly an intimate bond. It made the uniformed officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Then came the post-midnight leak of Celia's private notes, apparently discovered in Neville's house. A typed journal entry, never meant for public eyes, now splashed across social media. "I can't breathe in my own skin, can't wake up one more day pretending to be the perfect wife. Neville says I'm special, that my heart is too soft. Sometimes I believe him, sometimes I think I'm just broken. I want to fade away." The emotional rawness of those words impacted many readers, though critics pointed out it was still just one perspective. Tyler's grief was real too, and so was the sting of betrayal. Yet it became increasingly hard for the average person to see a simple black and white in this story. It was a swirl of heartbreak, possibly mental health crisis, and an ill-advised romance that ballooned into a national scandal. Meanwhile, Detective Castro meticulously constructed a timeline for the grand jury. It turned out the coroner's mix-up, combined with Celia's own cunning, created a perfect storm. Neville arranged for her to hide in the attic the night she was presumed dead. Tyler, after receiving a tip from the police about a found body matching Celia's description, identified the ring found on the deceased because the body was unrecognizable from its injuries. He accepted the coroner's statements at face value. The immediate funeral followed. Celia never left Neville's property, apparently too scared to go out. She turned off her phone for a while, but once she felt secure, she decided to text Tyler that final cryptic message. "Don't look for me. I'm gone." Perhaps it was an effort to release him emotionally, or maybe it was an impulsive move. Regardless, that message only fueled his suspicion, eventually leading him to file a new missing person report. And ironically, it was that second push that brought law enforcement to Neville's house. The detective found a bizarre poetry to that chain of events. The act Celia took to warn him away was the very act that revealed she wasn't dead. Within a week, the entire city was at a fever pitch over the upcoming grand jury hearing. Would Celia and Neville be indicted for fraud, insurance issues, emotional distress? The moral puzzle overshadowed the actual legal questions. Forging a death certificate is a crime, but so far it seemed more like a bureaucratic mishap. Everyone braced for a sensational trial, but the reality might be more subdued. Celia could face charges for misleading the coroner if it was proven she directly orchestrated the false identification. Neville could be implicated if he'd done anything to expedite the funeral or produce fake documents. Tyler's role was less about blame and more about heartbreak. In truth, he might be just as much a victim as the unknown woman in that ravine. As the preliminary hearing approached, a new rumor about Celia's health began circulating. Some alleged she was pregnant, fueling further frenzy. Was Neville the father? People jumped on that sensational angle, though the detective refused to confirm or deny. The community braced itself for a scandal that seemed to have no bottom. When Celia finally emerged from custody on bail, escorted by Neville's attorney, the cameras flashed so blindingly she could hardly see. She wore a plain sweatshirt and jeans, hair pulled back, her complexion pale. Neville walked beside her, stooped with age, gripping her arm as though to guide her. A wave of astonishment rippled through the crowd. They could be mistaken for a frail grandfather and concerned granddaughter except for the scandal that overshadowed every step they took. Reporters shoved microphones forward, yelling, "Celia, are you pregnant? Neville, did you manipulate her?" Celia kept her gaze down, ignoring the questions. A tense hush settled as they got into a taxi and drove away. Tyler, standing across the street, watched in silence, tears glistening in his eyes before he turned away. Everyone could sense the final stage approaching, but no one knew how it would end. That night, the local news teased a new exclusive, a secret witness statement that threatened to blow the case wide open. People waited anxiously for the broadcast, and when it came, it was a shock. An audio recording of a conversation between Celia and an unknown friend. "I never wanted Tyler to suffer," Celia's recorded voice said, "but I just felt so trapped." Neville said we could pretend I died. "I laughed at first, but oh God, I was desperate. I agreed," the friend on the tape responded. "That's insane, Celia. You know how messed up that is, right?" Celia let out a sob. "I know, but we were out of time. I knew Tyler would never give me a divorce. He said we'd work it out, that we were soulmates. I just couldn't face him again." The friend's voice grew frantic. "So you're gonna do it? You're really gonna vanish?" Celia whispered, "Yes, we'll run away and no one will find me." The conversation devolved into tearful rambling. The friend pleaded with Celia to think carefully, but the recording ended abruptly. That last line hammered home the reality. Celia's staged death was premeditated. She might have felt trapped, but she made a deliberate plan. There was no accidental confusion. She'd chosen deception. This revelation changed the public mood once again. Any sympathy garnered from her mental health backstory started to erode for those who felt her lies were inexcusable. The next day, the district attorney announced formal charges against Celia for falsifying information and perpetuating a fraud against multiple agencies, and charges against Neville as an accomplice. The city roiled with excitement at the prospect of a criminal trial. Celia's father made a statement, distancing himself from the entire fiasco but appealing for compassion, claiming his daughter wasn't well. Tyler, meanwhile, stared blankly at the prospect of testifying against the woman he still insisted he loved, even if he couldn't forgive her. Over the next weeks, the story's tension rose to new heights. An ex-coworker of Celia's emerged with claims that Celia once joked about how easy it would be to disappear. Another man came forward claiming that Celia had briefly dated him when she was just 18. "She's always had a restless heart," he told a trashy tabloid. "But I never imagined she'd do something like this." The neighbors found themselves in the crosshairs of reporters, hoping for any new detail about Celia and Neville's secret trysts. Brenda, the neighbor with the shared fence line, recounted how she once saw Celia crying in Neville's driveway. I asked if she was okay, and Mr. Hines said it was just a little misunderstanding. I never pressed the matter. Wish I had. Each regret, each half-told memory painted a portrait of a troubled woman and an old man who might have been either her rescuer or her downfall. Legal analysts took to the air, stating that while moral outrage was high, the actual criminal charges could be difficult to make stick. She didn't literally forge the certificate. It was a coroner's mistake, said one attorney on a local broadcast. The question is whether she actively contributed to that mistake. If she didn't, this might boil down to a domestic issue with bizarre circumstances. But that only fueled more resentment from the public, who felt that someone had to be held accountable for the heartbreak inflicted on Tyler and the resources wasted chasing a missing person ghost. The emotional stakes far outweighed the potential legal repercussions, which in turn created a sense that the trial might not deliver the satisfying justice onlookers craved. At the center of it all was Tyler, now living alone in a cramped studio apartment. His family suggested he move home with his mother, but he refused, stating he needed to figure out who he was without Celia. Every day he clung to the possibility that she might reach out with a genuine apology, might try to explain herself in a way that made sense. Instead, she seemed to cling ever closer to Neville, her father figure, lover, caretaker, enabler, or some combination of all four. That dynamic baffled many. How a vibrant, attractive young woman could be genuinely drawn to a man 5 decades her senior. Some who glimpsed them together described a strange tenderness, as though each found comfort in the other's loneliness. Others suggested it was akin to a sickness, an escape from reality. But if Celia's illusions of safety were shattered, she didn't show it in public. She kept her head down, speaking only to her attorney or to Neville in that hushed, sorrowful tone. The day of the grand jury hearing arrived, the courthouse crowded with reporters, local onlookers, and a handful of activists with signs either calling for Celia's freedom or condemning her as a manipulator. Tyler arrived with his mother, looking pale but resolute. Celia appeared with Neville, both escorted by attorneys, and they tried to avoid the cameras. The hush inside the chamber was heavy as the district attorney presented the case. Tyler was called to testify, recounting how the police told him Celia's body was found, how he'd identified the ring, how he accepted her death. He described the funeral, the eulogy, the nights of inconsolable grief. His tears returned as he recalled it all. Then he described the text message he received 2 nights before the truth came out. He began to sob on the stand. I realized, he said, that I never really knew her. Murmurs spread through the courtroom, the rawness of that confession echoing across the silent space. Celia sat hunched beside her lawyer, eyes lowered. When given a chance to speak, she offered only brief statements. I'm sorry. I see now how much damage I caused. I didn't know how to escape. I understand if people hate me. Neville's attorney tried to paint him as a naive old man who got in over his head. He didn't orchestrate anything, the lawyer said. Celia came to him, threatened to take her own life if she had to remain in that marriage. He offered her refuge. The rest of this fiasco is the result of mistakes by the coroner's office, not anything Neville intentionally planned. The prosecutor countered with the argument that Neville deliberately concealed Celia and assisted in her deception by providing her with a place to hide, instructing her on how to avoid detection, and essentially enabling the false funeral to become official. The hearing culminated in a swirl of legal jargon. The grand jury weighed possible indictments for criminal conspiracy, though many speculated the outcome would revolve more around moral blame than any significant prison time. That evening, a hush fell on the city as everyone waited for the outcome. Some bar patrons discussed the matter over beers, each offering their own brand of condemnation or pity. She's got to face consequences, one man said. You can't fake your death just because your marriage is tough, but I also get not wanting to be in a marriage you regret. A woman chimed in. People do crazy things when they feel trapped, but messing with a funeral is going too far. The tension was thick, social media flaming with heated debates about right and wrong in a scenario that defied easy moral lines. In a stunning turn, the grand jury decided to bring charges against Celia for falsifying statements to authorities, and Neville for aiding in her concealment, but they did not proceed with the most severe conspiracy charge. This opened the possibility for a plea deal. As news of the indictment broke, the media cycle escalated once more, speculating on potential plea agreements. The city braced itself for a trial, but rumors swirled that Celia's lawyer might push for a settlement to avoid a long, sensational court spectacle. People debated whether that was fair to Tyler. The man had endured a funeral, after all, and discovered the unimaginable betrayal of his wife living with an elderly neighbor. Meanwhile, a mental health evaluation was ordered for Celia, presumably to assess her capacity in past emotional traumas. This only fueled the commentary that she might receive leniency. The scorching gaze of public opinion was less forgiving. She's a grown woman, people argued. She knew exactly what she was doing. Others insisted, she's psychologically unwell, and Neville preyed upon that. The truth was tangled, with no single explanation satisfying the complexity. Everyone craved a villain, but reality offered a messy tapestry of bad choices, unspoken fears, and intangible desperation. When Celia's hearing resumed, the judge listened to arguments about her mental health, the coroner's role, and the background that led her to conceive such a plan. Onlookers noticed how Tyler fixed his gaze on the back of Celia's head, as if searching for one last flicker of the woman he thought he knew. In a brief recess, Celia and Tyler locked eyes for the first time in weeks. He mouthed, "Why?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned away. The heartbreak on Tyler's face was visible to the entire courtroom. A hush fell, as though even the audience recognized the raw tragedy overshadowing the legal formalities. It was at this point that a new twist came to light. Celia's father revealed that she once witnessed severe domestic arguments in her childhood home, some of which turned violent. She'd fled that environment at 17, carrying an internal terror of relationships that might box her in. A child psychologist was brought in to testify about how repeated exposure to controlling behavior can manifest in adulthood as extreme flight responses. This further complicated the narrative, but it didn't absolve her. The prosecutor reminded everyone that Tyler had no history of violence, and by Celia's own admission, he never laid a hand on her. Regardless, the father's revelation added a dimension that explained her primal fear of being trapped, even if that fear was irrational in her marriage to Tyler. During a dramatic moment in the hearing, Celia suddenly asked to address Tyler directly. Her lawyer hesitated, but she insisted. The judge allowed it. She turned in her seat and faced him. Her eyes shimmered with tears. "I know you won't believe me, but I did love you once," she said quietly. "I loved you in a small, scared way, but I couldn't handle the future you wanted for us. I thought if I just left, you'd chase me down. If I cut you off, you'd find me. So I did the most horrible thing I could do. I made you believe I was gone for good. I never meant to destroy your life. I just didn't know what else to do." Tyler's tears flowed silently. He didn't respond. The judge signaled for the trial to proceed. In the end, both Celia and Neville pled guilty to lesser charges of falsifying information and hindering a police investigation. They faced fines and potential probation, but not the years of incarceration some had hoped for or feared. The official statement from the court underscored that the coroner's mishap and Tyler's unintentional misidentification of the ring complicated the case. The judge expressed deep concern about Celia's mental well-being, ordering her into mandatory counseling. She was also instructed to have no contact with Tyler unless under specific legal parameters. Neville, for his role, was given a stern rebuke by the judge but escaped heavy punishment, partly due to his advanced age and lack of a prior record. The final rulings left a sense of unfinished business in the community. Some believed Celia and Neville got off lightly for the emotional havoc they wreaked. The media churned out final updates, summarizing the lurid details and concluding that the case was a cautionary tale of love, lies, and the lengths some will go to escape their circumstances. The sensational coverage gradually faded, replaced by newer scandals, yet for those directly involved, the fallout lingered. Tyler experienced a period of numbness, drifting from job to job, fighting depression. In a tearful interview months later, he admitted, "I can't fully trust anyone now. Part of me still loves her, part of me hates her, and part of me is stuck in the moment I buried an empty casket. Those words resonated with many who had followed the story. The man was forever changed, robbed of the security he once felt, forced to question how easily illusions could masquerade as reality. As for Celia, she vanished from public view after the trial. Rumors circulated that she was living in a small rental house on the outskirts of the city, attending mandated therapy. Some claimed she and Neville had parted ways under intense pressure. Others insisted they still met in secret. The only certain fact was that the fragile illusions that once bound them were gone. The court's glare stripped away the romance and replaced it with the shame of public judgment. Celia carried the weight of condemnation from strangers who thought her monstrous and from acquaintances who saw her as a broken soul. She was free in the legal sense, but the shadow of her deception loomed large. In the months that followed, the dusty ravine where the unidentified woman's body was found saw renewed attention. The police reopened the cold case, hoping to identify the victim, now that it was confirmed she wasn't Celia. That tragedy, overshadowed by the scandal of a staged death, reemerged with solemn force. An unknown woman, unclaimed, overshadowed by Celia's drama. On a local broadcast, a detective stated, "We have a duty to the real victim here, who never got her story told." That line haunted the community. While they'd been fixated on Celia's bizarre choices, a real tragedy had slipped through the cracks. Occasional fundraisers cropped up, aimed at securing resources to identify the woman. Yet progress was slow, overshadowed by public fascination with the more salacious aspects of Celia's scandal. Neighbors recalled how bright and ordinary things had been before this all began. A quiet street where the biggest concern was a barking dog or a messy yard. Now every house carried the memory of reporters crowding the sidewalks, of whispered exchanges about the young wife and the old neighbor. Brenda, raking leaves one autumn morning, stared at Neville's now empty house. He'd put it up for sale shortly after the trial. She sighed, telling her sister on the phone, "We used to think we knew everything about each other here. Turns out we never know what's behind closed doors." A passing car slowed, as if the driver was still curious about the infamous address. Brenda looked away, uneasy that her street had become a spectacle. A year later, an independent journalist produced a viral documentary titled "The Wife Who Wouldn't Die." It pieced together interviews, voicemails, leaked transcripts, and even amateur footage from neighbors. The dramatic hook was simple but powerful: a funeral with no corpse, a husband with shattered faith, an elderly neighbor turned lover, and a woman wrestling with her own demons. The documentary painted Celia as a figure trapped between mental fragility and selfish deception, Neville as an enabler with questionable motives, and Tyler as a casualty of love's illusions. It became a minor internet sensation, racking up millions of views in just a few days. Online commentators argued about who deserved blame or pity. Some exploited the story for dark humor, generating memes that twisted the heartbreak into punchlines. Others penned thoughtful essays on mental health, marriage expectations, and the complexities of personal freedom. Tyler watched the documentary alone in his apartment, feeling numb. Whenever Celia's tear-streaked face flickered on screen, he tensed, remembering the nights he lay awake, wondering if he'd missed some vital sign of her misery. The documentary ended on a note of grim irony. A shot of Celia's grave, the tombstone bearing her name, a physical testament to a life that never actually ended. The final frame lingered on that tombstone, underscoring the question left in every viewer's mind. What drives someone to bury themselves alive in a lie? For Tyler, the documentary offered no closure. He told a friend the next day, "It's like they took our worst moments and turned them into a spectacle. I hope she's getting help wherever she is." The friend said nothing, merely placed a comforting hand on Tyler's shoulder. In time, the city's collective memory dimmed. New scandals broke, the world spun on, and the name Celia Haverton became an urban legend of sorts, a cautionary tale told at dinner parties about the perils of unspoken fears and toxic secrets. If one were to walk down the quiet street where Neville's house once stood, the new family who moved in would say they heard weird rumors but never got the details. They'd point to the old fence line, mention that the neighbors still tell stories about a funeral that wasn't. Over the fence, a different occupant might mention how tabloids once parked on the curb for days, But time inevitably moved on. Late one afternoon, Tyler found an envelope in his mailbox with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper with a single line, "I hope you can forgive me." He stood there on the cracked sidewalk, reading the line over and over. He didn't need a signature to know who wrote it. A swirl of old anger and compassion welled up in him. After a long pause, he slipped the note into his pocket and went inside. In the quiet of his kitchen, he brewed a cup of coffee, remembering that Celia always liked a spoonful of sugar. The memory ached, but he felt something shifting inside him, a gentle letting go. She had asked for forgiveness without offering any more excuses or explanations. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't, but it was a step. In the end, the tragedy left an indelible mark on everyone it touched. Celia lived on, her name permanently tied to the idea of faked deaths and scandalous age gap affairs. Neville faded from public view, retreating somewhere into the anonymity that old age and legal tangles often bring, perhaps still believing he'd done the right thing by sheltering her. Tyler carried forward, a wounded but slowly healing soul, determined to reclaim a sense of self-worth. Their story was both a reflection of personal failings in the society that leapt to sensationalize them. There was no neat moral, just a tapestry of lessons about communication, mental health, the illusions we cling to, and the unthinkable lengths people will go to break free from the prisons they imagine around them. In the quiet corners of the city, older residents sometimes mention the tale, reminding younger folks that even the most outlandish headlines can sprout from everyday desperation. And while the world might see it as a dramatic fiasco, for those who lived it, it was a raw personal saga filled with real tears, real heartbreak, and real regret. With time, perhaps they all found different ways to bury the past. This time not in a staged funeral, but in a slow acceptance that some truths can never be fully explained, only endured.